Welcome back to our channel, your premier destination for the most explosive updates from the world of daytime drama. Today is a thrilling day to dive deep into the glamorous, yet treacherous halls of Forster Creations, where fashion is fierce, but family betrayal is absolutely deadly. Let us unpack the latest heart-stopping twist that will change everything. The atmosphere at Forster Creations has never been more suffocating, transforming from a sanctuary of haute couture into a brutal battlefield of bruised egos and corporate machinations. At the center of this suffocating tension is Hope Logan, a woman who has watched her life's work, the hope for the future line, be unceremoniously sidelined by the iron-fisted rule of Steffy Forster. For weeks, Hope has endured the condescension, the dismissive smirks, and the blatant disrespect from a co-CEO who seems more interested in settling personal vendettas than nurturing the company's diverse portfolio. Hope had reached her absolute breaking point, a moment of profound radicalization where she decided that merely surviving was no longer enough. She needed a champion, a warrior to storm the executive suite and dismantle Steffi's monopoly on power. She turned to the one person she trusted implicitly, her mother, Brooke Logan Forster, pushing her to launch a hostile takeover for that coveted co-CEO seat. However, the intoxicating promise of a mother-daughter alliance was brutally shattered, leaving Hope entirely isolated in the cold reality of corporate betrayal. The revelation that Brooke had completely abandoned their shared crusade was a jagged pill to swallow, but discovering the exact method of her mother's surrender was what truly broke Hope's spirit. Hope uncovered the sickening truth. Brooke had sent a highly diplomatic, conciliatory text message to Steffi, showering the tyrannical co-CEO with praise and validating her leadership. This was not just a strategic retreat. In Hope's eyes, it was an act of profound hypocrisy and a direct knife to the back. Brooke had chosen to prioritize the security of her marriage to Ridge over the survival of her daughter's career. The very woman who had promised to fight tooth and nail for Hope's respect had bowed to the enemy, leaving Hope to face the firing squad alone. A blinding, all-consuming fury took hold of Hope as the reality of the text message set in. The betrayal burned through her veins, overriding her usual diplomatic grace and replacing it with a raw, unadulterated need for confrontation. She could not fathom how her mother could look her in the eye, knowing she had secretly pledged allegiance to the very woman actively destroying Hope's legacy. With her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, Hope stormed out of the Forster Creations building, her mind racing with the stinging accusations she planned to hurl at her mother. The drive to the Logan estate was a blur of flashing traffic lights and white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel. She rehearsed every angry word, every tearful demand for an explanation, ready to unleash a lifetime of frustration upon the woman who had just sold her out for a fragile peace with Ridge Forrester. When Hope finally arrived at the sprawling Logan mansion, the heavy wooden doors yielded to her frantic push, but the environment inside was entirely wrong. Instead of the usual warmth and vibrant energy that characterized Brooke's home, Hope was met with a chilling, oppressive silence. The stillness of the grand foyer seemed to swallow her angry shouts as she called out her mother's name. The sheer normalcy of the elegant surroundings stood in stark, horrifying contrast to the dread that suddenly began to pool in the pit of Hope's stomach. Her footsteps echoed hollowly against the hardwood floors as she moved deeper into the house, her initial fury rapidly evaporating, replaced by a creeping, icy sense of absolute terror. Something was fundamentally, terrifyingly wrong. The scene that awaited Hope in the living room was a tableau of unimaginable horror that would be permanently seared into her memory. There, lying motionless on the plush, velvet sofa, was Brooke Logan Forster. Her skin was deathly pale, her breathing so shallow it was almost imperceptible. But it was the object resting on the polished mahogany coffee table that caused the breath to violently catch in Hope's throat, a completely empty bottle of prescription sleeping pills. The vibrant, indomitable matriarch of the Logan family was reduced to a fragile, unmoving figure surrounded by the silent evidence of a catastrophic overdose. The confrontation Hope had so vividly imagined dissolved into a nightmare of unparalleled proportions. Panic, raw and unfiltered, seized Hope's entire being. Her trembling hands scrambled for her phone, her fingers slipping against the screen as she desperately dialed 911. The operator's calm, steady voice was a jarring juxtaposition to the hysterical sobs tearing from Hope's chest as she screamed for an ambulance. As she knelt beside her unconscious mother, frantically checking for a pulse, a tidal wave of agonizing, suffocating guilt crashed over her. The anger she had felt just moments prior felt petty, selfish, and utterly repulsive. In that agonizing space between life and death, Hope's mind spiraled into a dark abyss of self-blame. The internal monologue that plagued Hope as she waited for the sirens was a relentless chorus of condemnation. She realized, with a sickening jolt of clarity, that she was the one who had pushed Brooke into this vicious, unforgiving corporate war. She had demanded that her mother step back into the crosshairs of the Forrester family drama, forcing Brooke to navigate the impossible, treacherous waters between her daughter's ambition and her husband's loyalty. Hope had radicalized Brooke, demanding a level of ruthlessness that had ultimately broken her. Looking at the empty pill bottle, Hope believed she had driven her mother to the absolute edge of sanity. The weight of her own ambition felt like a physical burden, crushing the life out of the woman she loved most in the world. She had wanted to save Hope for the future, but in doing so, she feared she had destroyed her mother's present. The blare of the ambulance sirens shattered the eerie silence of the estate, ushering in a chaotic whirlwind of paramedics, stretchers, and shouted medical jargon. Hope rode in the back of the ambulance, her hand gripping Brooke's cold fingers in a desperate, silent prayer. The sterile, blinding lights of the emergency room were a harsh reality check, completely stripping away the glamorous facade of their Los Angeles lives. As the doctors whisked Brooke away behind swinging double doors, Hope was left alone in the unforgiving purgatory of the waiting room. Every second stretched into an eternity, every ticking of the clock a painful reminder of the fragile line between life and death. In those agonizing hours, Hope mentally traded every sketch, every fashion line, and every ounce of corporate power just for the chance to hear her mother's voice again. When the doctor finally emerged, his expression guarded but reassuring, Hope felt her knees nearly buckle with relief. Brooke had been stabilized, her stomach pumped, her vitals slowly returning to normal. But as Hope rushed to her mother's bedside, the narrative of a tragic, stress-induced suicide attempt was about to be violently rewritten. Brooke's eyelids fluttered open, her gaze sweeping the sterile hospital room with profound, unadulterated confusion. She looked at the 4 lines, the monitors, and finally at her tear-stained daughter, her voice weak but laced with genuine bewilderment. When Hope gently, tearfully asked why she had taken the pills, why she had felt so hopeless that she wanted to end her life, Brooke's reaction was one of absolute, terrifying shock. Brooke Logan Forrester, a woman who had survived decades of scandals, betrayals, and heartbreak, looked her daughter in the eye and vehemently denied the accusation. She had no memory of taking the pills. She remembered making a cup of tea, feeling a sudden, overwhelming wave of dizziness, and then nothing but darkness. The realization hit the hospital room like a physical blow, sucking the oxygen from the air. Brooke had not tried to take her own life. She had been drugged. The empty bottle on the table, the perfectly arranged scene of a desperate woman succumbing to the pressures of a corporate war. It was all a meticulously crafted lie. It was a staged scene, a horrifying illusion designed to paint a very specific, very damaging picture. The sinister implications of this staged scene immediately began to crystallize in Hope's mind, sending a shiver of pure dread down her spine. This was not a random act of violence. This was a calculated, cold-blooded assassination of character. Someone had deliberately orchestrated this scene to make Brooke look mentally unstable, emotionally fragile, and entirely unfit for any position of power. In the cutthroat world of Forrester Creations, where public image and executive stability are everything, a suicide attempt would permanently disqualify Brooke from ever holding the co-CEO seat. It was a masterstroke of corporate sabotage, utilizing the darkest, most vulnerable aspects of human psychology as a weapon to eliminate a rival. The culprit had not just tried to harm Brooke physically, they had tried to murder her reputation and her future. The realization that someone was willing to cross such a depraved, criminal line elevated the existing Logan Forrester feud to a terrifying new height. This was no longer just about fashion lines, office politics, or even generational resentment. This was attempted murder, or at the very least, severe criminal staging with the intent to destroy a woman's life. The list of potential suspects instantly began to form in the shadows of the narrative. Could it be someone deeply entrenched in the Forrester camp? Someone so desperate to protect Steffy's reign and Ridge's legacy that they would resort to framing Brooke? Or was it a third party, someone lurking in the periphery, utilizing the existing chaos to eliminate the Logan matriarch from the chessboard entirely? The sheer cruelty of using mental health as a corporate weapon demonstrated a level of malevolence that Los Angeles had rarely seen. For Hope Logan, the transformation was instantaneous and profound. The suffocating guilt that had paralyzed her just hours before evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculated, and terrifying thirst for vengeance. The woman who had wept over her mother's unconscious body was gone, and in her place stood a daughter ready to burn the world to the ground to find the culprit. Hope realized that her mother had not abandoned their fight. She had been targeted because she was a genuine threat. The staged suicide was a desperate move by a terrified enemy. Hope's tears dried, her resolve hardening into an unbreakable diamond. She would no longer just fight for a fashion line or corner office. She was now fighting for her mother's life, her legacy, and her honor. As Brooke slowly recovered in the sterile confines of the hospital, the storm clouds gathered ominously over Forrester Creations. The perpetrator of this heinous act was still out there, walking the halls, perhaps even feigning concern for Brooke's sudden breakdown. But they had made one fatal miscalculation. They had intended to break the Logan women, to render them weak and disqualified. Instead, they had awakened a sleeping dragon. The war for Forrester Creations has officially transcended the boardroom, entering a dark, labyrinthine psychological thriller where no one is safe, and trust is the most dangerous liability of all. The battle lines have been redrawn in blood and deceit, and the coming days promise a reckoning that will shake the very